Lying is a human behavior we all recognize. Small lies, white lies, lies told to protect, to cover, to avoid. But what happens when lying becomes a way of life, an art form of survival? At what point does a lie cease to be a tool and become the very foundation of a person's existence? Few interrogations reveal this question more clearly than the case of Casey Anthony. A young mother, seemingly ordinary, suddenly at the center of one of the most disturbing crimes in modern American memory: the disappearance and later death of her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. But what stunned the world wasn't just the tragedy, it was the performance. Casey's calmness, her stories, the way she built an entire imaginary universe of lies to explain what couldn't be explained. In the interrogation room, we watch a young woman navigate the collapse of her fabricated world. And the result is both chilling and fascinating. This is the Casey Anthony interrogation. The story begins in June 2008 in Orlando, Florida. Cindy and George Anthony lived in a modest home with their daughter, Casey, and Casey's 2-year-old child, Kaylee. By all accounts, the Anthonys were a typical family with typical struggles. But beneath the surface, tensions were brewing. Kaylee was last seen on June 16th. That day, Casey left her parents' home with her daughter. For the next 31 days, no one outside of Casey saw Kaylee alive. 31 days. When Cindy finally demanded to know where her granddaughter was, Casey had excuses. She claimed Kaylee was with a nanny. She claimed she was at Universal Studios for work. She claimed she was too busy. Each explanation layered another lie over the last. By July 15th, 2008, the lies could no longer hold. Cindy Anthony called 911 to report Kaylee missing. Her words, frantic and desperate. "I found my daughter's car today and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." From that moment, the story exploded into one of the most infamous cases in American history. When investigators first questioned Casey, her demeanor raised eyebrows. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't desperate. She was calm, composed, even oddly casual. She told officers that Kaylee had been kidnapped by her nanny, a woman named Zanny Gonzalez, or Zanny the Nanny. She explained that she had been searching for Kaylee herself for weeks, too scared to involve police. The details seemed plausible enough to a casual listener, but under scrutiny, the cracks began to show. Detectives followed up on the nanny's name. No such woman existed in Casey's life. She claimed to work at Universal Studios. Detectives drove her there. Casey walked confidently through the halls greeting employees, until finally stopping and admitting she didn't actually work there. It was all a lie. At each stage, Casey doubled down. Confronted with evidence, she pivoted, shifted, created new details. It wasn't panic, it was performance. Soon, Casey found herself in the interrogation room, face to face with detectives who knew she was lying. The tapes from these sessions have since become legendary, studied not only for their role in the case, but for what they reveal about pathological lying under pressure. Casey sat with perfect composure, weaving story after story. She described babysitters, friends, phone calls that never existed. She detailed her days as if they were routine, though investigators quickly proved they were fiction. To watch her is to see someone living inside the web they've spun. Every question becomes an opportunity to reinforce the illusion. Every contradiction is smoothed over with another invention. But in these moments, something deeper emerges. The psychology of denial, narcissism, and control. Casey wasn't just lying to detectives, she was lying to herself, clinging to the narrative she had built, because the alternative, the truth, was unbearable. While police pressed Kaylee for answers, the media swarmed. The story of a missing toddler, her young mother's bizarre lies, and a family divided by suspicion captured national attention. Images of Kaylee surfaced, smiling at parties, drinking with friends, shopping casually, taken during the very month Kaylee was missing. To the public, it was incomprehensible. How could a mother behave this way if her child were missing? To investigators, these images were more than disturbing. They were evidence. Evidence of Kaylee's detachment, of her prioritization of self over her daughter. Evidence that Kaylee's disappearance wasn't the sudden kidnapping Kaylee insisted it was, but something far darker. In December 2008, the truth came out. A utility worker discovered a bag in a wooded area less than a mile from the Anthony home. Inside were the skeletal remains of a small child. Forensic tests confirmed it was Kaylee Anthony. The discovery shattered any remaining hope. The lies about the nanny, the fabricated jobs, the imaginary phone calls. They all collapsed under the weight of undeniable reality. Kaylee Anthony was arrested for first-degree murder. But even then, even with the world watching and the evidence mounting, Kaylee maintained her innocence. She insisted she didn't kill Kaylee. She insisted her lies were misunderstandings. She never broke character. By the time of her trial in 2011, Kaylee's lies had become infamous. The defense painted her as a victim of trauma, claiming Kaylee drowned accidentally and that Kaylee's father helped cover it up. But the stories shifted, details changed, and still Kaylee never admitted to killing her child. Her lies weren't just cover-ups. They were scaffolding, holding up a version of reality she wanted the world and herself to believe. And this is what makes the interrogation so chilling. It shows us the psychology of someone who has replaced truth with invention, who has built an entire world of lies and chosen to live inside it, no matter the cost. When detectives first sat down with Kaylee Anthony, they weren't speaking with a frantic mother desperate to find her missing child. They were speaking with someone oddly calm, oddly collected, and disturbingly comfortable. The recordings show a young woman who doesn't appear burdened by urgency. She doesn't cry. She doesn't demand help. And she doesn't beg investigators to find Kaylee. Instead, she spins stories, layered, elaborate, and confident. The lies were delivered so smoothly that, if you didn't know the case, you might believe them at first. But the detectives did know, and they began to push. One of the most telling moments comes when detectives ask Kaylee to take them to her workplace at Universal Studios. She agrees, walking with confidence through the halls, waving at staff and chatting casually. For several minutes, she maintains the illusion that she is an employee. But then, when she can no longer continue the charade, she stops, turns and admits, "I don't work here." It's a stunning moment. Most people caught in a lie would show embarrassment, guilt, maybe even shame. Kaylee shows none of these. Instead, she pivots, as if revealing one falsehood is simply an opportunity to replace it with another. This moment reveals her psychology. Lying isn't just a defense mechanism. It's a lifestyle. It's improvisation. A theater where she is both actor and playwright. The centerpiece of Kaylee's story was Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, also known as Zanny the Nanny. According to Kaylee, Zanny had been watching Kaylee for years. She had an apartment, a phone number, and even mutual friends. Casey claimed she dropped Kaylee off with her, only to have her vanish. But investigators quickly discovered the truth. Zanny didn't exist. What's fascinating isn't that Casey lied, but how she sustained the lie. She described Zanny's habits, her personality, and her relationships. She created an entire human being from thin air. This wasn't a cover story, it was a parallel reality. Psychologists call this confabulation, the creation of detailed, believable fabrications to fill gaps in reality. In Casey's case, it wasn't simply defensive, it was her instinct. The detectives knew Casey was lying. Their strategy was to let her speak, to give her enough rope to hang herself. They asked open-ended questions, watching as she spun stories. They circled back to details, catching her contradictions. They pressed gently, then harder, observing her reactions. What they saw was not the unraveling of a panicked mother. It was the performance of a narcissist under pressure. When cornered, Casey didn't collapse. She doubled down. She laughed at times. She gestured with confidence. She acted as if she were the one in control. To understand Casey Anthony is to understand pathological lying. Unlike ordinary lies, pathological lies aren't occasional or strategic. They are chronic, compulsive, and often self-destructive. The pathological liar lies even when the truth would suffice. They lie even when caught. They lie because lying is how they navigate reality. Casey's lies during interrogation fit this pattern. Each falsehood wasn't carefully constructed for long-term survival. Many of them were easily disprovable. Yet she delivered them anyway, with conviction. Why? Because for Casey, truth wasn't the foundation of her reality. The story was. She believed that if she said it confidently enough, the world would bend to her version of reality. Beyond pathological lying, Casey's behavior reveals traits of narcissism. She consistently placed herself at the center of the narrative. Her stories weren't about Kaylee's safety, but about Casey's role as the struggling, misunderstood mother. When investigators pressed her, she emphasized her own struggles, her own image, her own hardships. In one sense, this narcissism was protective. By centering herself, she shielded herself from guilt. But it also revealed the darker truth. Kaylee wasn't the focus of Casey's world. Casey was. This self-centeredness is seen most clearly in the weeks Kaylee was missing. While her child's body was decomposing, Casey was out partying, entering a hot body contest, shopping and smiling for photos. To her, maintaining the appearance of a carefree life mattered more than confronting the horrifying truth. Another psychological weapon Casey wielded was gaslighting. Gaslighting isn't just lying, it's lying with the intent to distort another person's reality. By confidently insisting that Zanny existed, that she worked at Universal, and that she had been searching for Kaylee, Casey attempted to make investigators doubt their own evidence. She leaned into detail. She described conversations, phone calls, and addresses, all invented. She spoke with a tone of authority, as if the detectives were the ones misinformed. This strategy works in everyday life. Family members had long grown used to Casey's fabrications, bending their perception of reality to accommodate her stories. But in the interrogation room, with trained investigators and hard evidence, the gaslighting couldn't hold. As detectives circled, Casey's stories began to fray. Confronted with proof that Zanny didn't exist, that she didn't work at Universal, that her timeline was false, Casey still didn't confess. Instead, she shifted the story. Maybe Kaylee was taken. Maybe she was hidden. Maybe she would still be returned. Even in the face of undeniable reality, Casey clung to the illusion. Because to admit the truth, to admit Kaylee was dead and she was responsible, would shatter the identity she had built. What unsettled many who watched the tapes wasn't just the lies, but Casey's demeanor. She didn't show the typical signs of guilt or grief. No tears, no desperation, no collapse under pressure. She appeared composed, even casual. At times, she smiled. At times, she seemed to enjoy the performance. This eerie calm has been interpreted in two ways: as evidence of psychopathy, or as evidence of a young woman so deeply in denial that her mind refused to let the truth surface. Either way, the result is chilling. The Casey Anthony interrogation has since become a study in deception, used by criminal psychologists and interrogation trainers alike. It shows how pathological liars build elaborate stories. It shows how narcissists deflect blame and center themselves. It shows how gaslighting can distort reality until it collides with hard evidence. But most of all, it shows how a young mother could lie until the very end, never admitting the truth, even as her daughter's remains lay just a mile from her home. At the heart of the lies, the trials, and the media circus was a child, 2-year-old Kaylee Marie Anthony. Kaylee never had a voice in this story. Her life was cut short before she could explain what happened, before she could tell anyone what she saw or what she feared. All we know is that in the final days of her life, she was in the care of her mother, the one person who was supposed to protect her. Victim psychologists tell us that children rely completely on their caregivers for survival. For Kaylee, her world revolved around Casey. Her trust was absolute. Her safety was supposed to be guaranteed. That trust is what makes her story so tragic. Kaylee's innocence became her vulnerability. If she sensed danger, she likely didn't recognize it as danger. She likely believed that no matter what happened, her mother would keep her safe. And that belief, that pure, unguarded trust, was betrayed most devastatingly. The Anthony family became a case study in denial and fractured loyalty. Cindy Anthony, Kaylee's grandmother, was the first to raise the alarm. Her 911 call captured both desperation and suspicion. She admitted the car smelled like death, but still she wanted to believe her daughter. She oscillated between anger at Casey's lies and fierce defense of her innocence. George Anthony, Casey's father, was equally torn. During the trial, the defense shockingly accused him of covering up Kaylee's death, even of molesting Casey, claims George denied. The accusations shattered what little stability remained. From a psychological standpoint, the Anthonys illustrate the agony of cognitive dissonance. They loved Casey, yet they couldn't reconcile that love with the overwhelming evidence against her. They loved Kaylee, yet they were forced to process her death through a storm of lies and courtroom battles. Families of criminals often suffer collateral trauma, but in this case, the trauma was broadcast to the world. Their grief, their fights, their breakdowns, all became public spectacle. When Casey Anthony was tried for first-degree murder in 2011, the nation was transfixed. Court TV coverage, live-streamed testimonies, endless debates on talk shows. This wasn't just a trial, it was a cultural phenomenon. The prosecution argued that Casey killed Kaylee to free herself from the burden of motherhood. They presented the lies, the party photos, the duct tape found near Kaylee's remains. They painted Casey as a selfish liar who valued her own freedom over her daughter's life. The defense countered with an alternative narrative. Kaylee drowned accidentally in the family pool, and George Anthony helped cover it up. They offered no evidence, but they sowed just enough doubt. On July 5, 2011, the jury found Casey Anthony not guilty of murder. She was convicted only of lying to law enforcement. The verdict shocked the public. Millions had expected a guilty verdict. Protests erupted. Commentators called it the trial of the decade. Casey was branded the most hated mom in America. Psychologically, the public's outrage reveals something important. We crave narrative closure. We want justice to match our sense of morality. We want lies to be punished and innocence to be vindicated. But the Casey Anthony trial reminded us that the courtroom isn't about morality, it's about reasonable doubt. So who is Casey Anthony? Psychologists who studied her behavior point to three dominant traits: pathological lying, narcissism, and denial. Pathological lying was her survival tool. She invented realities to escape accountability. It wasn't strategic, it was compulsive. Narcissism kept her at the center of every story. Even when Kaylee was missing, Casey's narratives revolved around her own image, struggles, and needs. Denial was her fortress. To admit Kaylee's death and her role in it would shatter the identity she built. So she never admitted it. Not in interrogation, not in trial, not even now. Whether she is a sociopath, a narcissist, or a deeply traumatized young woman, one truth remains: she lied until the very end. Cases like Casey Anthony's capture national attention not just because of the crime, but because of what they reveal about us. We are drawn to lies. We are fascinated by how far someone will go to maintain them. We want to understand how an ordinary young woman could deceive so many, so convincingly. We also fear what her story represents, that evil doesn't always come with a mask or a weapon. Sometimes it comes with a smile, a casual tone, a well-told story. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one who convinces you they're harmless. The Casey Anthony case became a cultural Rorschach test. To some, she was a monster who murdered her child. To others, she was a young woman crushed by family dysfunction and public hysteria. The truth may never be fully known, but the lies will never be forgotten. As we listen to Casey in those interrogation tapes, we hear something unsettling. Not the sound of a guilty person breaking under pressure, but the sound of someone who refuses to break at all. She lies with ease. She fabricates with detail. She deflects, gaslights, and performs. And through it all, the truth remains buried, just like Kaylee. What does this teach us? It teaches us that truth isn't always obvious, that some people can lie so smoothly, so confidently, that even trained investigators struggle to catch them. That lies, when woven deeply enough, can become the very fabric of a person's identity. But it also teaches us something about ourselves, our need to believe, our vulnerability to deception, and our desperate craving for justice when innocence is destroyed. In the end, Kaylee Anthony's death remains a tragedy wrapped in lies. Casey Anthony remains a psychological mystery, a case study in deception, denial, and the human capacity to live within an illusion. And the tapes remain a haunting reminder of a chilling truth. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones told with a smile.